Okay, so delighted to be joined by Mark Ogden, senior writer with ESPN. Mark, how are things?
I'm good, thanks. A little bit tired. Got back at 2 o'clock in the morning from Grimsby last night, which is not something I'd think I'd be saying,
It's
but
the
there you
first time
go.
you've ever said that, I'd say.
And hope for the last.
Like, we'll get into the many, many, many talking points from the game, but just the experience. Optically, it looked frenetic, it looked brilliant, it looked like a proper cup tie atmosphere.
Oh, listen, I mean, as a football reporter, it had everything, and I'm not complaining about that whatsoever. It kind of started the day before. I got an email from Grimsby confirming my pass, but it said, just to let you know, you're in press box B. There is no desk, no power, and you got a restricted view. So, and the restricted view meant that I couldn't see the top of one of the goals, and on the far side of the pitch, all I could see was legs. So it was, and obviously every time that Grimsby went forward, the fans jumped up. So I've got probably more of a view of the goal that Onana let in than Onana got a view of it, but. Yeah, it was quite chaotic, but yeah, you don't forget these nights. I was actually at Grimsby 20 years ago, believe it or not, when they beat Tottenham, 89th minute goal. So I think Grimsby for me is a place that I'll try to avoid in future.
And just like it's hard to distill the entire context of this because the United story is so layered, especially in the post Ferguson era. And I think people deal with their many mishaps in that time. It's quite glib and it's kind of like rock bottom, what's below rock bottom, etc. But in your tenure covering the club, and it is notable, I think stats come through almost on a weekly basis of the new lows United seem to be reaching. But first time ever losing to fourth tier opposition. Like in your time on the beat with this club, like where does this rank? Is this like among the all time lows?
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, last night it didn't feel like the all-time low, but I suppose the bit of 12 hours later it probably does because I was at MK Dons in 2014 when they lost 4-0, Lou Van Gaal's team, same round. But on that night, Van Gaal played loads of fringe players and kids, and they shouldn't have lost 4-0, but you can explain it. But last night, United were pretty strong. And there's been a few over the years. There's been a few embarrassments in Europe. I was in Kazakhstan once when they lost to Astana, but again, that's in the Europa League. Losing to a fourth division team, albeit a good fourth division team who deserved to win, that kind of that's kind of hard to. I can't think of anything worse. I mean, even going back as a kid, United lost at Bournemouth when Bournemouth were lower league back in the FA Cup in the early 80s. And I can't think of anything that's as bad as this. York City in the 90s. But again, losing to a fourth division team as Man United it's pretty bad, it is pretty bad.
Yeah, and just to give Grimsby their credit, like as you said, they're a good team, a good outfit, but you rarely see, like, barring the frenetic and frenetic energy and ferocity in the early throes of a cup tie, and the underdog gets about the higher opposition. Like, they actually wasn't the case. They kind of outplayed and outthought United as much as out fighting them in the initial phase of the game.
Yeah, and I was at Fulham at the weekend and Marco Silva after the game said it was quite easy to work out what United do and what they did, pretty much, how you can get at United and Grimsby had the same approach last night. And that for me gets to the heart of the matter with Ruben Amorim. It's his stubbornness and refusal to change his formation to 3-4-3, which is basically a two midfielder. The four is two wing backs who, he's not kind of found two reliable wing backs. So you've got two midfielders who every time they play they're outnumbered. They're outnumbered against the three, which is bad enough, but it's really bad when you've got midfielders who can't run. So at the weekend it was Casemiro alongside Bruno, and last night it was Ugarte and Mainoo who, Ugarte can't run or pass. Mainoo can pass, but he can't run. So if you're playing against Man United, you know that if you've got energy and you can get around the midfield, you'll overwhelm them. So whether that's a Premier League team or a League Two team, so unless Amorim changes that and he's shown no inclination to do that, then this is going to carry on. It's like that, the definition of insanity is doing the same things over and over again. And for me, Ruben Amorim is either he's either not seeing the problem, which makes him a bad coach, or he's seeing the problem and he's doing nothing about it, which makes him a bad coach. So it doesn't look well, whichever way you spin it, really.
And you mentioned the MK Dons game. It did strike me as well, and you've obviously couched it quite well in terms of the context was different in that it was a different strength of team that United fielded on that occasion. But it did precipitate like big changes in the squad. Like Di Maria had already agreed to join, and people will remember the last days of that window. They were just selling players, getting players in, and like as it turned out, ill-advisedly in a couple of occasions, like Johnny Evans was bombed out and turned out to be better than all the centre backs they had for the 10 years which followed. Um, the difference here is Amorim has been backed, like,
Mm.
and they've kind of got behind him to the, to the detriment of other players. They've backed him in his decision making as much as anything, and how he's cultivated this squad and alienated certain members of the squad, quite obviously. So I just wonder, it's this new administration headed by Ratcliffe and Wilcox kind of, and Barada, they make the point that we're not reactive, like we have a well thought out plan. So I will be intrigued to see if this does spark a bit of a panic spree.
Well, I mean, they haven't got the money for a panic spree. That's the thing. They've done their spending. They've done £200 million already this summer, having told us months ago that they've got no money. They could have been bankrupt by Christmas. So, you know, maybe that was a bit of a little bit of a white lie, but still, £200 million is a big outlay. They haven't brought any in yet. I mean, they might get Garnacho off the books and Hoyland in the next few days, but it's not going to raise enough to bring the players in. Obviously, they won't. They'd like Carlos Baliba at Brighton, but you're talking £100 million for him, and they need a goalkeeper. They clearly need a goalkeeper, but obviously they're looking at the kid at Royal Antwerp, Senny Lamans, but he's only a kid. He's not a proven goalkeeper. He's not Gianluigi Donnarumma or
Mm.
Emi Martinez. So they have big problems, but it's interesting for me because Eric Ten Hag was backed as well in his final summer when it was obvious he wasn't the guy. Backed him, signed a lot of players that weren't good enough for Man United, who are still there, obviously. And they've done the same with Amorim. They've backed him again. And what I really struggle to work out, and I still haven't got the answer, is that when United appointed him, they said that they will be appointing coaches from now on that will play a certain way, that they will, and the whole club will play that certain way. So why did they appoint a coach who only plays one system?
Mm.
And which means that they can only sign players who play to that system, and means that if this guy goes, the manager goes, then the next coach has to be a guy that plays this system because all the players have been brought to the system. I don't actually believe it. I think they say things sometimes just to put people like us, away for a few days and say we've answered that now go away. But it doesn't stack up that you only build your squad around one formation, and then you sack it with players who can't play that formation. So yeah, they're obviously smarter people than we are, but it's not working so far, is it?
Yeah. Like I mentioned, the glib framing sometimes of these Man United disaster classes or whatever people like to call them. Like, but then again, sometimes perception is reality in these things, and just the optics of Amorim last night weren't great. People
Mm.
might read too much into them, but at the same time, they're lasting images, like sort of rocking back and forth during a penalty shootout away to Grimsby in the second round of the League Cup, and him scrambling around with his tactics board, like looking a little bit frazzled. And then we earlier in the show today, we played some fairly stunning interviews he did, most notably, I think, with Gabriel Clark on ITV, and just one quote in particular. I think the players spoke really loudly about what they want today. Something has to change, and you're not going to change 22 players again.
Mm.
Are you reading into that in the same way many are, that he's saying the players aren't playing for him, and or, you know, they're not going to get rid of all these players, so they're probably going to get rid of me?
Yeah, that was my initial reaction last night when he was basically digging at his players, saying, "Look, guys, this is what I've been left to deal with. They're not good enough, and how can I make it work with these players?" And I have some sympathy with that argument a little bit, but he's asking those players to play a way that is completely alien to him. He's actually the only player I think that formation suits is Harry Maguire, because at centre half he's got protection around him with two other centre halves. Every other player is struggling with the system, so it's all right, kind of suggesting the players spoke loudly for him. Well, maybe they were speaking loudly by saying, "Boss, this system isn't working. It's making us all look worse than we are. Can you change it, please?" But it was a bit petulant as well, saying we can't keep changing all these players, because he's brought four forwards in this summer. He brought in Dorgu in January. If it's not working, change the formation to something that suits the players, and then paper over the cracks even for a year just to get to where you want to be. But don't just go at it like this with they have to play this way, whether they're suited to it or not. But yeah, like if you can't change 22 players, then what do? You change the coach, and it almost sounded like a yeah. I think he also said as well, we'll get through the weekend and we'll have conversations. I read into that. It's either we have conversations to make some late signings, or it's we'll have conversations to find a way that I can get out of this club. It's probably the latter, because he did on a couple of occasions last year go well. He said it kind of publicly in press conferences that if I'm not the guy, then I'll have to go and things like that. He's not talking like a guy that's got long term commitment to a club. I think he would jump at the first opportunity.
Yeah. like in any role, I suppose, when you're managing upwards, he's obviously dealing with a fairly stacked boardroom above him, and obviously we're not entirely privy to those conversations. But every job, there's some sort of mitigation, and you have to meet people halfway. And I presume that is happening. Like ideally, he would want a whole overhaul of centre midfield, for example, and a brand new top class goalkeeper, and he's probably saying he's having to pick his priorities in that regard. But the compromise on tactics is crazy to me. Like, have you ever seen a coach who's willing to die on his sword over tactical inflexibility to this extent? Like, this is his hill to die on.
Yeah, Ange Postecoglou is probably the one, and at least he won a trophy, but he was always going to go at Tottenham. He was the other one that was.
Yeah, but
Just,
ironically, even in that case, in the final, they won the
yeah,
final by basically throwing that out the window. So, and Ten Hag did the same thing when,
yeah,
rightly or wrongly, or truly or falsely, Jason Wilcox suggested playing Bruno Fernandes as a false nine or whatever. Yeah, it
yeah.
just feels like Amorim never will do that.
No, and he's almost like he's made it possible, now, hasn't he? Because from day one he said we're going to change it, and he didn't even bed it in gently. It was straight away. So if he changes it now, that's an admission of defeat on his part, and it's an admission that it was wrong.
Mm.
Even though that'd be the right thing to do, managers don't want to say that they're wrong. It's a sign of weakness, isn't it? But a bigger sign of weakness is not changing it.
Yeah.
So he did a bit of a tailspin, and I think you know, the people at the club, there's obviously been a lot of churn upstairs as well. Dan Ashworth went, and he wasn't actually behind the Amorim appointment. He had other suggestions which weren't particularly great. Marco Silva, okay, but Graham Potter, not so much. Um, Omar Barada was the guy that drove the Amorim appointment. So, and he's the CEO. So, if Amorim proves to be a failure, then it reflects badly on Omar Barada, who came from Man City with this big reputation as being the guy that's going to turn United around. He will have to answer to Jim Ratcliffe, who'll say, well, why did we appoint this guy if he's so inflexible that he can't change things when it's not working? So it isn't just Amorim that's, in the crosshairs here, it's Barada as well. And at the same time, it's Jason Wilcox, who was brought in by Barada, who worked with him at Man City. So there's a lot of people that could be taken out by this if Amorim goes. So that's why they're probably doing all they can to make sure he stays. But you just kind of delaying the inevitable, really, because unless they get some results, and you don't see how they're going to get some results, then it's only going to end one way.
Yeah, I think you've hit on an interesting point there. I think it's like a fundamentalism to your own. This is Amarim Inc. These are my tactics,
Mm.
and I will be fine. I'll leave United, and I'll be able to blame the system and the setup and the players, but it's not my fault. So I
Mm.
think that's kind of what he and many other managers are falling into this. You've seen like Vincent Company being the best example, where he played to the detriment of Burnley, got them relegated, and then got the Bayern job. I'm not sure if Amarim will quite pitch up somewhere like that, but he's obviously just trying to consolidate his own safety. In terms of player for player in that United squad, Mark, we could we could spend all day, and I'm conscious I don't want to keep you all day. But let's start with the goalkeeper. This goalkeeping setup has to be among the worst United have ever stared into, where nominally the first choice goalkeeper steps in for a League Cup tie and essentially cost them the game.
Yeah, they saved one penalty, but to have what was it, 12 penalties go past him, that's embarrassing for
Yeah.
Andre Onana. Not to mention the corner that he flapped at and conceded the second goal. I mean, look, Man United don't have a good goalkeeper. They've got two goalkeepers who are probably number twos at best. I mean, I said last week that I think they've probably got the worst two keepers in the Premier League, but I hadn't seen the West Ham goalkeeper at that point. But they've got Tom Heaton, who I know this again sums up Man United. He's 39 years old. He hasn't played a competitive game for a long time, but he's probably their best goalkeeper. Former England, Burnley goalkeeper, very solid, reliable goalkeeper, knows the league, knows the physicality of it, knows you have to come for your crosses. But Amrin just won't play him. So he's got Bayender, who at best is Turkey's number two, and Anana, who's just, the worst Man United goalkeeper. Well, we're not the worst I've ever seen, because I saw Massimo Taibbi, Fabian Barthez, and Mark Bosnich. So they've had a few difficult ones, but they need a solid goalkeeper. I mean, Jurgen Klopp dealt with that at Liverpool. He got Alisson in to replace Karius. You know, Pep Guardiola had it with Edison for a few years. Mikel Arteta's signed three goalkeepers, ended up with Raya, who's his number one. Goalkeepers are crucial, and I just don't understand why Amorim's persisting with these two, because they're just not good enough, and it's a constant weakness. I was at Fulham at the weekend, like I say, and Fulham were just targeting Binder every time there's a corner. They put one of their players on to give him a slight nudge,
Yeah.
put him off balance, and he'd fall on his backside or he'd be crowded out. Same happened last night, so that's the problem. But they don't seem to be anywhere close to resolving it before the window closes.
Yeah, like that. That's it. Like I think it's not as if it was all on Onana last night, but there are like these bend but don't break cup ties where the favorite team has to ride their luck, and the
Mm.
other team doesn't take their chances. Whereas it happened, like the two goals were very preventable if they had like even a safe pair of hands, like Tom Heaton,
Mm.
as you said. To flip maybe to the other end of the pitch, and Benjamin Sesko, who made his first start yesterday, he looked like a little bit of a deer in the headlights at times with the occasion, I thought. I'm not trying to be wise after the event, but like he probably wasn't expecting the fervour that greeted him against League Two opposition. And then I don't know if you read anything into him being like so far down the penalty kick order when it came to it.
Yeah, that was a shock, really, because I mean, first of all, he missed an easy chance to win the game in the last kick of the game in the like 96th minute. He and Matt Matthijs de Ligt got in each other's way and he put it over the bar from 6 yards. So maybe that was in his head. But to be the 10th player to take a penalty in the shootout, basically the only one that was left with the goalkeeper, that was weird because you're a £74 million striker. Strikers take all the penalties nowadays. It's what they do. They pad their goals out, don't they, by taking penalties. So that was odd, and that doesn't bode well for kind of strength of character if he's that far down the list. Last night was difficult because just like Rasmus Højlund a lot last year, he wasn't getting the service. But I think he's got a bit more physical presence than Højlund. But Sesko, Cunha, and Mbumo, they've gone there and they're not getting the service. They're just not. And Cunha was very frustrated last night. I think a lot of it, gets back to the midfield. They can't control the game.
Mm.
Even against Grimsby, they were overrunning midfield. So if your midfield isn't getting the ball and controlling it, your forwards aren't going to get the service. So they're not getting the ball unless Bruno gets the ball. But when Bruno's in midfield, he has no tactical discipline, so he's leaving his position vacant, leaving Casemiro off on his own to plug the gaps, and it's just a shambles really. The forwards are getting starved of service because the midfield is completely incompetent, and then your goalkeeper's really bad. It's hard to fathom how he's going to solve this. It really is.
And one last player I wanted to ask you about was Kobbie Mainoo, and like
Mhm.
not to frame him as like all things to all people, but we've kind of seen that he's a talented player and has performed well at Man United. He's certainly got a better track record than Amorim at United. So I was
Yeah,
kind of wondering, it was an interesting one for all the other ones like Anthony, Sancho, Rashford. You could kind of see how fans would take the manager's side on those. But to draw battle lines along Kobbie Mainoo and make him a cause celeb, I thought that was strange one. I think that he might have been biting off more than he could chew there, just optically. By United are so proud of, if nothing else at this stage, the heritage of like academy players always being in the squad, and to get rid of Menu, which seems like what Amorim is pushing for. Even before last night's game, I think he maybe pushed the boat out a little bit too far.
yeah. I get the impression that Maine's a bit of a red line with a lot of the fans. I think until now they've been very much behind Amorim, and I think that they kind of want him to get rid of a lot of the players you mentioned. But Mainoo, they think he's like you say, he's a homegrown player, local lad, England international. He is Man United through and through in that sense. And to let him go does look very short-sighted by Amorim. It's almost like he doesn't care about the heritage. But the flip side, and I'm just playing devil's advocate here, is that Man United have this proud tradition. I think it's 1937. They go back where they've had a youth team product in every game. Well, you know, that has been kind of done in recent years because squads have now 18-man squads on match day, so that you can pad it out with a squad player. If we still had like three subs or even one sub like back in the old days, you'd never ever have this record lasting so long. But if the record goes away, it's because the kids aren't good enough. And I do wonder about Kobbie Mainoo at times. Yes, he's talented, but he's not quick enough. He can't get around the pitch, and certainly in that formation, he can't get around the pitch. But to be a top class midfielder, you need athleticism and the ability to get box to box. And Kobbie Mainoo's not got it. He's one paced. So maybe the fans are being blinded by the fact that he's a homegrown player and he's like you say he's carrying the flame for the academy, but he's not top level. He just isn't. He's not a player that would get any of the great Man United has in the past. He's too slow. So maybe Amorim's thought, well, he's too slow. Let's move him on because they will get decent money for Kobbie Mainoo. They're not going to get any money for Casemiro, who's also too slow. So maybe it's a case of, look, if we get this one out, then we can bring somebody in. But the problem is you've got to bring somebody in, and now we're on Thursday. The
Mm.
transfer deadline's Monday evening. They just left it way too late. And also, look, none of the big clubs are knocking the United's door down to sign Kobbie Mainoo. Liverpool and Chelsea and Arsenal aren't, and Man City aren't saying we want Kobbie Mainoo. So maybe that tells you something about Kobbie Mainoo.
And just lastly, before I let you go, try and somehow sum all this up. So they face into Burnley, which,
Mm.
like, you know, not to comically call it like a relegation 6 point or anything like it, but it's not a shoe in. Like, it's not the Burnley at home typically would have been, back to like firmer ground, but certainly can't say that with any assuredness at the moment. Then you're into an international break, followed up by the Manchester Derby and Chelsea.
Yeah.
So I just wonder, I don't expect you to have a silver bullet or an automatic answer, but how do you foresee these next couple of weeks playing out? Because as you said, the one other thing I haven't mentioned is Jim Ratcliffe has
Mm.
bought this club. He's on a bit of a ticking clock himself. This is a bit of a vanity project and he wants to get success quickly. He's not in here for a 10-year project. So I just wonder how you think this next couple of weeks might play out.
Look, I think it ultimately plays out with Amorim losing his job, and it's a case of I think it's a case of when rather than if, because I think he's been there for 10 months now. He's lost more games than he's won. The performances aren't getting better. You know, they might beat Burnley at the weekend, and like I said, there's no guarantee they will because Burnley will make it difficult. And for Burnley, it's a great game because the United are a huge pressure. But if they beat Burnley, you can see them losing against City or losing against Chelsea. There's no sense of any progress in this team or momentum. I don't see with the way that he plays, Amrin is set up, and the players that he picks, how he can turn this around. Because there's always going to be a big, difficult game on the horizon. So I think it's delaying the inevitable. Amorim will probably be gone by Christmas because the results aren't good enough, performances aren't good enough, and despite the fact that Man United are wanting to succeed, they're not stupid. They're not going to carry on if it's harming the club. Because let's be honest, last night was a European route that was closed, so they can't get to Europe via the Carabao Cup now. They're going to struggle to get in Europe via the Premier League, and it's just the FA Cup. Then you talk about another year out of Europe for Man United. So that's why Amorim can't survive much longer if this carries on because United are a football club, but they're also a business and they need the money to come in and they need to be in the Champions League. But that's a distant dream, but they need to be in Europe. So he needs to start delivering quickly. And I just don't see how he can. That fixture list is a minefield. They might win one, but they'll get, like I said, blown up in the next one. So matter of time, I think.
Yeah, as ever, we'll watch with interest. Mark Ogden, thanks a million for joining us.
No problem. Cheers.